What's up? This is Take His Whistle podcast, back with another one. My name is Parker, like always. Today, another NFL episode for you. We got a lot to talk about, such as a lot of injuries. The Jets might have figured out a QB and a little bit of fantasy talk. Just stay tuned. This one's going to be a good one.
Steps into it. Pass is caught. Touchdown! Play clock at 5. Pass is
Back today, so I got time to be tripping and writing no love song. Yeah, writing no love song. We all experience love loss. Yeah.
What's up? Take His Whistle podcast, back with another one. This is another episode of the NFL podcast. I believe it's our second one. I'm here with this crisp sounding voice finally. And obviously I'm accompanied here by my best friend Josh.
What's going on, everybody?
And we got a lot to talk about today. Like I said at the beginning, we got a decent amount of injuries. Big storylines coming in, especially in New York, if you want to ask me. Josh, anything you want to start with?
I mean, you kind of said it. The Jets. Zach Wilson's playing he's playing good enough. I know in the last game against the Eagles, it was mainly the defense that kind of stepped up. But, I mean, Zach Wilson is playing good enough to allow that team to continue being successful without Aaron Rodgers.
Yeah, and like you said, he didn't have a good game by any means. I mean, he put up 186 passing yards, 19 for 33 completion percentage, but did just enough to get the win. And the crazy thing that I kind of want to point out here is the turnovers. Obviously, Zach Wilson didn't have a turnover. On the other hand, Jalen Hurts, with the 5-0 Eagles, had 3 of them. 3 interceptions compared to Zach Wilson's none. I mean, it really seemed like Zach Wilson had a better ball game.
Yeah, I mean, when you look at it, obviously Jalen Hurts threw for more passing yards, but those 3 interceptions really hurt the Eagles. And then, you go over to Zach Wilson, and he really only threw for 100 less yards, but he didn't turn over the ball. He didn't throw any touchdown passes, but again, he didn't turn over the ball, which is a big problem with his past. And I mean, if you're a Jets fan, seeing Zach Wilson not throwing an interception, you're probably wondering if that's even the same Zach Wilson. And I mean, again, I can't really say it enough, to be honest. He's looked good enough, and it's honestly making that team look better, even though he's not performing at a all-pro level.
Yeah, and I said something last week about it. Obviously, this is not what the Jets wanted. The Jets did not want Zach Wilson to be the starting quarterback again. But just a way for Zach Wilson, who looked like his career was just slowly or maybe even quickly dying, kind of found a resurgence. And I'd be darned if there's not an NFL team out there taking notes saying, hey, this guy can be our quarterback of the future.
Yeah, and it also doesn't help when you have a star wide receiver in Garrett Wilson, who is probably one of the better running backs in the league, one of the better wide receivers in the league this year. And I mean, in his rookie year last year, I mean, you could see the flashes. They were all there. And coming into this year with Aaron Rodgers at the helm, I mean, a lot of people were thinking Garrett Wilson would be a top 5 wide receiver in the league in general. And with Zach Wilson taking the helm again, I mean, Garrett Wilson is still being talked about as a top wide receiver, and that says a lot about what Zach Wilson has been able to do so far with the starting role, and also it says a lot about Garrett Wilson as well, and just how good he is as a receiver to be able to, just consistently be open and to help Zach Wilson out in a way as well to perform at the level that he has so far.
Right. I'm looking forward to see kind of just where the Jets go, if they're legit, not as in a Super Bowl contender, but are they a team that can seriously try to make a push for a playoff spot, one of those last playoff spots. They do have a fairly tough schedule. Obviously, being in the AFC East is never easy. Playing teams like the Bills, you play the Bills, you play the Dolphins twice. They got the Chargers this upcoming Monday on Monday night. It's gonna be. I'm gonna be looking. It's a game definitely to be looking forward to. Just continuing to see the Jets move, especially with the situation that they're given. But let's move on to a team that is not so hot. Me and Josh briefly spoke about it before we started the podcast. The Denver Broncos. Let's take it back. Not even to this past week. Not even to this season. But going into last year, they bring in Russell Wilson, which was probably the biggest move of the offseason, was the Broncos bringing in Russell Wilson. What has gone wrong? Why has there been so many things that have gone wrong in Denver, and it just continuously gets worse? There's no bright spots in Denver for some reason.
Yeah, I mean, I think last year was a pretty big mix of everything, that being the coaching staff. There were many coaching decisions last year that kind of faulted that team. And then also Russell Wilson just performing in a way that just we haven't seen in his career up to this point. I mean, last year Russell Wilson was not recognizable. His time in Seattle, I mean, he was consistently a top 5 or top 10 QB in the league, Pro Bowler every year, and last year it kind of shocked everyone at how bad he performed. And I mean, this year he's not having a stellar year by any means, but I mean, he only had 1 interception before this most recent game against the Chiefs, and so I mean, he was playing better this year, yet the team as a whole isn't performing any better. And I honestly don't think I can fully blame him this year for the lack of production from that team. And I kind of put the blame more on the coaching staff yet again. And as you know, Parker, they traded for Sean Payton this offseason. And, you know, a lot of people were saying they were going to be a Super Bowl contender this year with Sean Payton as the head coach, and they have looked the complete opposite.
Right. I want to say, like, just kind of off the 6 games that we have seen played so far from Denver, Sean Payton doesn't have, if it's the respect or they just don't trust him like they did in New Orleans. I don't know what the answer is, why he has just completely lost the locker room completely, but Sean Payton, he's not, you can tell he's not the same coach as he was in New Orleans. It's just, that also could be a offensive, defensive coordinator situation. It could just be not the staff that Sean Payton wants in Denver, but I really don't know what the answer is with Sean Payton, and it's just another thing that has gone wrong in Denver. It's just a train wreck franchise.
Yeah, and I know one of our buddies, Lando, is a huge Broncos fan, and so I know he's hurting watching those games every week because, I mean, they just haven't looked impressive, and they also just find a way somehow to just lose games. I mean, I want to say the Jets game, it was a relatively close game, but they still just somehow found a way to just fumble the bag in the second half and really just give it away to the Jets. They got outscored 23-8 in the second half in that game, which I know that was a big game because Nathaniel Hackett, you know, got fired by the Jets last year and went over to the Jets and then turned around and just completely embarrassed them in that game. So, but I mean, I really don't know what to say about the Broncos just because they have so much talent on that team. They have many pieces on that team that are just so talented. You know, you got Jerry Jeudy and Cortland Sutton. You got Javonte Williams. And that's just the offensive side. I mean, you go to the defensive side and you got, oh gosh, I'm blanking on his name right now. I don't know why though, because he's one of the best corners in the league. Can you help me out here a little bit? Patrick Surtain Jr. I mean, that team, and then on top of that, in the past couple of weeks, we're seeing them release a bunch of people. We're seeing them clear up cap space. It kind of seems like they're just planning on maybe tanking for Caleb Williams, maybe, or for something. Maybe they see something in the draft that they really like that they don't think they can get if they continue to win. But it definitely doesn't seem like they're trying to win. I don't know if that's the right way to put it, but I'm not seeing much effort from the Broncos this year.
Yeah, to me, it seems like the front office in Denver they don't want to say they're tanking. It's the same thing that the Dolphins did for Tua. They're not going to actively come out and say that they are 100% tanking. But if they don't win another game for the rest of the year, I don't think that front office is going to mind. They have their guy. They know who it is, and they're basically just in a race for last place at this point.
Yeah, it's just the only thing is that Russell Wilson contract is so hefty, and it's just such a thing that's on the Broncos' shoulders. I just don't know how they're going to go about handling that situation because, when they traded for him, they gave him such a big contract, and if they're planning on taking a QB in this upcoming year's draft, there's just no way another team takes on that cap hit from Russell Wilson.
Right. Well, moving on from that train wreck in Denver, how about the undefeated teams? There was 2 going into last week, week 6, and now going into week 7, there's none. Let's start out with the team that I was more shocked to see them lose is the 49ers. Now, obviously, they had 2 fairly big injuries go down offensively, and that's being Christian McCaffrey and Deebo Samuel. Both of them go down. They get upsetted by Deshaun Watson and the Browns. Another team that has been struggling with injuries all year, the Browns. And I'm sorry, I didn't mean Deshaun Watson. I meant Philip Walker.
Yeah, I don't think many people were expecting that, and PJ Walker definitely did not perform, as good as a team that beat an undefeated team, and probably what many people would say is the best team in the NFC, maybe the best team in the league. They didn't lose to a QB who performed at a standard that you would say, would warrant them losing that game. But the Browns' defense really kind of stepped up in that one. But also Amari Cooper with 4 receptions and 108 yards, really just leaps and bounds above every other receiver on that team. And then Jerome Ford, having himself a game as well. But I think that defense really kind of showed out in that one. And also, though, the 49ers just didn't really look like the 49ers in that game. I know, like you said, CMC went down and Deebo Samuel went down, but they also just have so many other weapons on that team that it made me very questionable as to, why they weren't doing more, because, they still have Kittle, they still have Brandon Ayuk. And to be honest, Brock Purdy kind of showed why he's not a star QB yet in that game. He didn't have himself a great game either, throwing 12 completions on 27 attempts for only 125 yards, and then adding a pick in there. He definitely didn't perform to the standards that I think a lot of people kind of hold him up to as far as a star QB in the league goes.
Yeah, Josh, you want to hear my take on this? I've said this before, and this is going back again to last season. Last season, you start out with a quarterback room of Trey Lance, Jimmy Garoppolo, and Brock Purdy. Right, Trey Lance goes down at the beginning of the season. Right, so then you go back to your quarterback, Jimmy Garoppolo, who has done nothing but win up until at that point in his career, and he still did nothing but win. He got you guys in the playoffs. He goes down. You rely on now the last pick of the draft, Brock Purdy. Now you're stuck. You end up losing to the Eagles, who end up going to the Super Bowl. You're stuck with a decision to make in the quarterback room. Do you go with Trey Lance, Jimmy Garoppolo, or Brock Purdy. You let the Raiders basically steal Jimmy Garoppolo from you. You trade Trey Lance for basically nothing to Dallas. You go all in on Brock Purdy, and it's okay. It's okay whenever Christian McCaffrey's playing because their offense is so heavily used of Christian McCaffrey. They use him all the time, whether that is him running the ball, him running a route, catching the ball, blocking, whatever it is. It's some type of play that's going to involve Christian McCaffrey. And so it's fine. Christian McCaffrey is far and away the best running back in football. But then he goes down, and you have to change your game plan. You can't run the ball like you did with him. You can't. He's not your safety valve on the outside end where you can just toss it up to him whenever nobody's open. You are forced to make these plays, and now Brock Purdy is showing you guys he may have not been the best choice to stick with, especially when you're talking Jimmy Garoppolo or Trey Lance. I think that, especially if McCaffrey's out for more than this 1 week, it's going to really show. And in my honest opinion, I think San Francisco messed up by picking Purdy over the other two.
Yeah, and a name that I kind of want to mention here, as far as Trey Lance goes, he gets traded to the Cowboys, and everyone thinks maybe he'll learn from Dak, and then maybe they'll move on from Dak and start Trey Lance in a couple years, or maybe he'll just be a backup and a solid backup at that. But then in the 49ers game a couple weeks ago, we saw that Trey Lance was actually the third string quarterback behind Cooper Rush. And it made a lot of people question as to why they would even trade for Trey Lance at that point. At least I know it made me question it because, coming out of the draft, and even when he was on the 49ers, I know he dealt with a lot of injuries, but people were still saying, hey, this is a guy with a lot of upside if you just give him the chance. And he was given the chance at the beginning of last year, obviously got injured and was out for the season. And then, of course, everything that transpired. But are NFL teams or are people giving up on Trey Lance without actually ever seeing anything from him? Because in my opinion, I think he still has a lot of upside, and I think he can still be a great QB if given the chance. But he just hasn't been given the chance.
I don't either, and I have a big Cowboys fan at work. He is nonstop. He is that typical Cowboys fan. And after that 49ers loss, they lost to the 49ers, I asked him about it. I asked him about Cooper Rush being put in over Trey Lance in garbage time, that it didn't mean anything at all. And I kind of just asked him, I was like, why was Trey Lance not put in? Like, why is that? And his words almost exactly is Trey Lance is terrible. He's not good at all. That's why he's worth a 8th round, 7th round pick for whatever he traded. I don't remember what he traded him. They traded him for. But I don't see how you can say that. He gets hurt. He's out for the season. He hasn't played football since. Now, if that's what you're scared of, you're scared because he hasn't played football in over a year. I get that. That's one thing. But to sit there and say he's terrible and he's no good, he's got no upside, he's just a washed quarterback. He just throw him into the recycled pile of old injured quarterbacks. That's one thing. I don't know why Trey Lance hasn't been played yet in Dallas, especially with subpar quarterback performance from Dak Prescott. I don't know. I really don't know.
Yeah, and on top of that, I mean, Trey Lance legit, I think, has one game of experience, and it was in a legit, and I'm saying legit, monsoon against the Chicago Bears last year, at the start of last year. Mm-hmm. And, I mean, if that's what you're going to judge the man over, then, I mean, what are we doing here? It was a literal monsoon. Like, that you're not even passing the ball in that game, so what are you really judging the man over? Like, how good he handed the ball off? Like, I mean, he's a top 5 draft pick, and I don't see why people have written him off just like it's nothing. Maybe NFL teams see something in his college film, or maybe they just see something in the way he is in the study room, or something. Maybe they're just seeing something that we're not seeing as fans, but I think Trey Lance needs to be given a shot, and I don't think that shot is fully out of reach yet. I think if a team is super desperate at quarterback, I believe Trey Lance is easily tradable, obviously, as we saw by the Cowboys, and I think he could be given the shot at a starting job, but I don't see why it hasn't happened already. But off of that note, Parker, let's move on to the other undefeated team that took a loss this past week. We kind of went over it already a little bit at the beginning of the episode, but the Philadelphia Eagles falling to the New York Jets 14-20. Parker, what did you see from that game that stood out from you, maybe other than Zach Wilson, since we kind of already talked about him?
Yeah. Not necessarily Zach Wilson, but I think just that Jets defense. And I think we did talk about it a little bit last week, how good that defense can be. And it was more or less just a run-stopping day. The Eagles couldn't get anything going running the ball. DeAndre Swift, who's turned his career around, he's had a great season so far. He was only limited to 10 carries, 18 yards. Kenneth Gainwell, he was the second biggest rusher behind Hurts. He only had 13 yards. I think that is what a big kind of just motion in Philadelphia is just if you're running the ball well, everything else is going to open, which is true. But you find a team like the Eagles, who all year long, all they have done is just run the ball. They finally come up against a team that is going to hold them to those limited rushing yards, and they kind of just go all over the place. And that, again, is forcing Hurts to throw the ball more. And A.J. Brown had a phenomenal game, 131 yards and 7 catches. But you also see him throw 3 interceptions, too.
Yeah, I saw a few forced passes in that game by Jalen Hurts. Luckily, more of them weren't picked off, and he should be lucky that only 3 of them were intercepted, because he definitely threw more that could have been picked off. Yep. You mentioned A.J. Brown and his game, but one thing that stands out to me, and again, before I say this, I know Devontae Smith had multiple drops in that game, and they should have been easy catches. Devontae Smith could have had a better game. Same with Dallas Goedert. Both of them had dropping problems in that game, which I do believe kind of hurt the Eagles a little bit. But at the same time, we're not seeing these big plays downfield by Devontae Smith or Dallas Goedert, and it makes me wonder, is it because they're not getting open, or is it just because these teams are figuring out how to lock up these other receivers except for A.J. Brown? And, in the long run, you want to be able to lock up everybody, but, surely A.J. Brown isn't the guy that you want to be the one that's open every single play. But they've found a way to win, so, good on the Jets, but at the same time, I'd like to see the ball get spread around a little bit more to the other receivers, and they only had 2 less receptions than A.J. Brown, and A.J. Brown didn't even lead the team in receptions. It was DeAndre Swift. Just a lot of those passes were checkdowns, and Swift did catch a receiving touchdown, but I believe that was somewhat at the goal line, which, regardless, it was still a touchdown, so good on Swift, but I would like to see them not drop the ball as much, because that would probably help the team a lot more. But I would also like to see Smitty and Goddard get involved a little bit more, because personally I love them both as players.
Yeah. I'm curious to see what happens next week, as when they're at home, but they're playing against the Dolphins. The Dolphins are known to have an okay defense, but they're obviously a offensive-minded team, right? They're going to have a shootout with anybody, especially the Denver Broncos. But I'm curious to see how they react to a team like that you can't outscore the Dolphins. You're not going to beat the Dolphins by outscoring them. You're going to have to play a little bit of defense. And I don't have a problem with Philadelphia's defense. I'm more or less kind of curious, how elite is that offense? Because, you go back to last year, their Did they go undefeated in the regular season, or did they just lose one game or something like that?
The Eagles?
The Eagles, yeah.
Yeah, they lost one game.
One game. They had the easiest schedule in football. Far and away the easiest schedule. This year, way different. They have a much tougher schedule. I'm very curious to see how legit this team is. Is this another Super Bowl contending team, or is it just a pretender that it does good in the regular season and then folds under the playoffs?
Yeah, I think that game is going to be, I mean, if you want to talk about a game where you're probably just going to see a lot of passing, I'm going to say go ahead and check out that game, because the Dolphins passing defense and the Eagles passing defense, both respectively, don't have that great of pass defenses as far as this year goes. I know Philadelphia's pass defense it can be good with James Bradbury and Darius Slay, obviously two very good corners. But as far as this year goes, we've seen we've seen kind of a lackluster pass defense in comparison to last year. And then the Dolphins, their pass defense, they have a lot of injuries in that secondary, so their defense just isn't that great either. And I mean, we could see a huge day for Jalen Hurts and Tua as far as the passing game goes. And I mean, those top receivers on both teams, Waddle and Hill, and then AJ Brown and Smitty. I mean, we could be seeing some high scoring numbers from this game, and then some high number games from these players.
Speaking of the Dolphins, this is something that I kind of wanted to touch on, just because how good they have been this year, or how good the record says they are. Are the Dolphins a legitimate Super Bowl contender? Is it safe to say that they could have a chance to win a Super Bowl this year?
I think it is. It's up in the air for me, because that offense is so high powered, as we've seen already, putting up 70 points against the Broncos. But at the same time, that defense just does not compare to that offense. And you know what the saying is: defenses win championships. And
the same, man.
And if they have a lackluster defense like that, like they have, in comparison to such a high powering offense, I mean, we could be looking at a team like the Kansas City Chiefs from last year, with just a high powering, high scoring offense, and just a good defense, but just not like not an elite defense to compare to an elite offense, which I know that's rare to see anyways. But I mean, when you're looking at a team like the Dolphins, I think you kind of have to ask, what are the limitations of that offense? Because I think if they are going to make a run like that, it's going to kind of heavily run on how that offense does and how many points they can keep putting up.
Right. Yeah. I don't know. I another kind of just, I don't know if Tua is ready yet. He has been built around great receivers, as in Tyreek Hill, Jalen Waddle, Mike Gesicki last year was a great tight end. I am more or less curious, especially as the season goes on and these games become more meaningful as the playoff picture starts forming. Is Tua ready for that prime time position? Is he ready for that next level to be put up in kind of like that upper echelon of Patrick Mahomes, Joe Burrow? I guess you could put Jalen Hurts in there too. Is he ready to take that next step? I'm curious to see.
Yeah, he's definitely on the right path as far as performance goes, especially this year. I mean, we're seeing his best season by far. Obviously, if you have a track team surrounding you, it's pretty hard not to put up good numbers every game. But, it also takes a good QB to accurately throw the ball to these guys when they're running 90 miles per hour down the field. And so, I mean, his accuracy and his deep ball accuracy this season has looked really good. So, like you said, Parker, we'll definitely see going further on in the season. But moving on from the Dolphins, what other teams have kind of piqued your interest here at the start of this season? And what do you think their expectations are, or how far do you think these teams can go?
I think everybody is just as a NFL world as a whole. The team to watch right now is definitely the Lions, only solely from the fact of how bad they've always been. I know in my lifetime, I think they've made the playoffs once since I've been born. I could be wrong about that, but I'm pretty sure it's only been once. They have just been historically bad forever. Now they are sitting at 5-1. They are running all over the NFC North. There doesn't really look like a team right now that they have really played that has been able to hang with their stuff, and that's offensively and defensively. And that's the thing. That is Jared Goff doing this to them out of all quarterbacks. You think of these elite quarterbacks, Jared Goff is not the guy you think of. And now you have finally found that guy that has been like, oh wow, Jared Goff has really took this team to be 5-1. I think they have really put the entire NFL world on notice, and I'm curious to see, especially next week as they go up against the Ravens. What are you seeing in that?
I mean, I agree with the Lions. I mean, in our lifetime alone, just, from '03 to now, we have literally seen them go winless in a season. Mm-hmm. So, I mean, and to your point about the playoffs, we've seen them make the playoffs 1 or 2 times, and that was with Matthew Stafford and Megatron, who is one of the greatest wasted talents of all time. I mean, you can't understate it how wasted his career was being on the Lions. But as far as this season goes, you kind of said it there. They're just super exciting to watch. Sam Laporta looks incredible. Amon-Ra St. Brown kind of broke out last year, and it's just kind of continuing that this year as one of the top receivers in the league. Amon-Ra just looks incredible. J-Mo is back, and I mean he could potentially turn out to be one of the best wide receiver 2s in the league. And then on top of that, you got the rookie running back in Jahmyr Gibbs, who, along with David Montgomery, who they signed in free agency this year, they look like one of the best running back duos in the league. Yeah. So, I mean, that offense, we talked about the Dolphins being high-powered, but this Lions offense is just, you can point to so many people and be like, man, this offense is just incredible, and Jared Goff has all these young guys around him, and I think it's helping him. I mean, this is probably the best core that he's had around him in his career. I know when he was on the Rams, that obviously that team was what it was, Todd Gurley and everything like that. But I mean, as far as wide receiver weapons, I mean, this is his best core that he's had, in my opinion. And then he has a pretty damn good running back core to go along with it, and then also on top of that defense looks really good as well. Aiden Hutchinson looks like he is developing into one of the best D linemen in the league. And then they signed, I believe, C.J. Gardner-Johnson in free agency from the Eagles. And just, I mean, what they're doing and how they're turning around that franchise is, I mean, it's definitely something to watch. And I mean, I'm definitely going to keep my eye on them, not only this year, but in the years to come. Because I mean, like Parker said, in our lifetime, we have not seen a good Lions team. And to see a good Lions team now, it honestly, like, as a Vikings fan, they're a rival of ours, but I can't even be mad. I can't even be mad because they've been so bad historically, and to see a team winning like them, it's a feel-good moment. It really is. Like, it as an NFL fan as well, like, it just makes me feel good that, a franchise has gone from poverty to essentially just the top of the world. And, yeah, I mean, I don't know what type of run they can make deep into the season as far as the playoffs go. But if they make the playoffs, I wouldn't be surprised if they could make a little run in the playoffs.
Yeah, I do. Obviously, I want to kind of touch on this point. I know Lions fans are at an all-time high right now. The one gripe I do want to say, they haven't necessarily played anybody Obviously, they beat the Chiefs week 1, right? And that was a shock. That literally shocked the entire sports world for a full night. Nobody saw that coming. But then they lose to the Seahawks, which, that was kind of just a throw-up game in overtime. But then they go on to beat the Falcons, Packers, Panthers, and Buccaneers. Neither of those, or none of those teams are necessarily good teams, I would say. I know the Packers have shown some good things here and there, and same with the Falcons. But obviously the Panthers are a train wreck. They're probably the worst franchise this year behind the Broncos. The Buccaneers, who haven't really found their footing, they just have a lot of missing pieces. But I mean, and then looking forward, obviously I know they played the Ravens in Baltimore this upcoming week, which is going to be a must-watch game to kind of see what Detroit is really about. But then afterwards, I mean, you play the Bears twice, the Packers again, Saints, Broncos, and then you end the season 2 games against Minnesota and the Cowboys. So overall, a fairly easy schedule, especially compared to some of these other teams what they have to go through. Like the Eagles. The Eagles have an insanely hard schedule this year. I'm curious to see, and that's something that we won't know until playoff time to see how legit this Lions team is, but just obviously something to think about. Just their strength of schedule isn't there.
Yeah. I mean, I can't help it, but you mentioned the 2-game stretch at the end of the season against my team, the Vikings, and I mean, honestly, for the past few years, you would look at that and be like, "Oh, those are going to be hard games." But I mean, this year you can't even say that. You really can't. And I know Parker has a different opinion than me about him, but with the uncertainty about if Jay Jettis is going to play again this season,
He's playing this season.
You really just don't know what's going to happen there. So, but moving on from them, Parker, do you see any other Week 7 matchups that pique your interest at all?
Yeah, definitely. Another kind of big game for the NFC East, because I don't think the Cowboys are as good as people say they are. But just a big game to see who could potentially contend behind the Cowboys and Eagles. The Commanders and Giants. The Giants lost a heartbreaking game to the Chiefs. A lot of people, again, we talked about it last week, are the refs kind of being easy on the Chiefs. But they lose a heartbreaker. Now they're going on to play a Commanders team that really hasn't proven much. That is an interesting game. I don't know what to expect from it, but I'm excited to see exactly where that plays out.
Yeah, it'll definitely be a decent game. I don't know how, I can't sit here and say that it's going to be high scoring, especially with Daniel Jones at QB, but I will say though, I think the game last week, I think it might have been the game that you were trying to talk about, Parker, is the game against the Bills. Yeah. Am I correct about that? So I just want to say, this is all I'll say about that game, is that was definitely defensive pass interference against Darren Waller, and the Giants should have won that game.
Yeah, they should have, and that wasn't just the only call. There was a multiple bad calls that game, and that's probably why I was thinking it was the Chiefs that they were playing, because how bad those calls were. Another game that kind of raises some eyebrows. Another shootout game, Chiefs-Chargers in Kansas City. 2 really high-powered offensives. We haven't seen the explosion from the Chargers like we would have thought just yet. Now that could be because Eckler he's only played 2 games this season, but that could be a reason why. And who's their other receiver behind Keenan Allen that got hurt?
Mike Williams.
Mike Williams has also been hurt. So that also could be a reason why. I'm curious to see what exactly is going to happen in that game as well. Is that going to be a shootout game, or is that going to be more of a defensive field goal based game?
Yeah, I think it'll I'm leaning more towards an offensive shootout, but that might just be the NFL fan in me talking, just because I think games like that are always entertaining to watch. But like you said, we haven't seen the explosiveness from the Chargers quite yet. But Justin Herbert is an outstanding quarterback to have on your team. I know with Mike Williams being out for the season, that's definitely heartbreaking for Chargers fans, but you do have this rookie wide receiver, Quentin Johnston, that I think a lot of people are hoping can turn out to be of Mike Williams' stature. And I know with Mike Williams, this is his contract year this year, so they might be looking to let Mike Williams walk after this year and just keep Quentin Johnston as the Mike Williams replacement. So hopefully he can pan out because, with Mike Williams healthy, that leaves so much space for Keenan Allen to be open consistently, and even Mike Williams. But with Eckler back though, and not missing two key pieces not missing two key pieces of that offense, and Eckler and Mike Williams, and instead just not having Mike Williams, I think it'll open a lot of closed doors for that Chargers offense. The Chiefs are the Chiefs. They've kind of always just been high scoring for the past 5 years now. I think it's been. Mahomes and Kelsey are just another breed, and honestly, we're not hearing too much about a single Chiefs wide receiver just because Mahomes can just do literally anything with any receiving core in the league. But I hope that game turns into an offensive shootout because I think that would be very entertaining for the viewers. But moving on from Week 7, Parker, I know for a fact this is going to take up a decent chunk of this episode, if not the rest of this episode. Let's talk about some fantasy. I know in our personal fantasy league, we had a bit of controversy today.
Let me explain this. Let me take the keys of this one because this just really ruffles my feathers. Should we go back to the initial trade, the first trade that ended up getting vetoed?
Yeah, sure. Yeah.
Let's go back to that one. So, just to lay it out there, we it's a bunch of friends in this league. It's all our high school friends. A couple new faces have kind of joined in, but there was a trade. There was a trade made last week. This trade was for Travis Kelce and Amon St. Brown. Did I say that right? Amon-Ra St. Brown. That was given up by a good friend, Mason. Mason gave up those two. In return, Mason received Evan Ingram, Deebo Samuel, and Isaiah Pacheco. Right? So that trade happens. No one said anything besides myself about the trade. It kind of just went on. No one said anything. Mind you, Noah's team is already the most stacked team in the league. Then this week comes by, Noah puts up an ungodly amount of fantasy points, and it's kind of just showing that nobody can touch Noah's team, and the league that we're playing for second place. So we all came together in a group chat and kind of had a league meeting to veto that trade. That trade was vetoed. The players will go back to each player's respective teams. Then more controversy pursued, and I'll let Chad take it from here.
Okay, so what then happened from there was with Mason getting Kelsey back on his team, he said Kelsey is still on the market. So many people sent trade offers, including myself.
I think we should also point it out. Mason is 0-6 too in this league.
Mason has not won a game yet, and he is at the bottom of the league. So with that being said, Mason let everybody know that Kelsey is still on the market. And multiple people sent him offers, including myself, and Mason decided to take my offer, which was Nico Collins, Sam Laporta, and Chris Olave for Travis Kelce and Amari Cooper. And that trade was immediately vetoed, and a discussion was started in our group chat about why it was vetoed. And I'm going to pass it back over to Parker and let him explain why everyone thought it should be vetoed, because obviously I had a different opinion.
So, again, put this in perspective. Josh over here, he has the second best team in the league. Kind of far and away, really. I mean, as far as points scored, there is another person in the league that is also 5-1. Josh is 5-1. But as far as points goes, far and away, Josh has that second place locked up. Another stack team, he made a pretty fleece trade earlier in the season for Tony Pollard as well. So that trade was pretty much vetoed right away because that's not a fair package. It's not a fair package at all. And someone like Mason, I don't really know what was going through his head, because this is the second trade in a row that he has been absolutely fleeced for Travis Kelce. I don't think that he understands how good a value Kelce is. Sorry, Mason, to put you on blast here, but I'm being honest. So that trade was vetoed because we didn't think it was a fair trade, and it's juicing Josh's team and not helping Mason's team at all. Kind of what that is what a veto is for at the end of the day. In the real world, the most common thing when you think of a veto trade is Chris Paul whenever he was on the Hornets. He was traded to the Lakers to team up with Kobe Bryant and I believe Pau Gasol at the time to make just this overpowered Lakers team. Nobody was going to touch this team.
Super team before super teams.
It was a super team before super teams. That trade was vetoed because, one, the Hornets weren't getting back enough for Chris Paul's value, and it's also making this Lakers team overpowered. That is what a veto is. That is what a veto is for. This is, in fantasy football terms, the exact same thing. You are juicing up a team while the other team is not getting anything in return. Obviously, you can't throw in like draft picks or something like that, so there's nothing to level out the playing field as, oh, well, if you give me Kelce now, I'll help you out for the next 5 years. It's just a one-and-done thing. The trade ended up happening. Travis Kelce and Amari Cooper is on Josh's team.
Yeah, so to explain how that happened, essentially how it happened anyway, so pretty much I'm gonna go ahead and say it because it is what it is. A big argument started in our group chat over
a discussion, a debate.
A friendly disagreement happened in our group chat.
Maybe friendly.
Maybe friendly. There might have been some words in there, but so essentially what I said, because I am the commissioner of this league, I said, you know what, guy, and just to mention, I'm sure he's listening. Mason jumped into the conversation and said, "Hey guys, like, it's my team. Like, you know, if I want to make a trade, even if it's a fleece, you know, it's my team. Just let me decide for my own team," which it is a fair point to an extent. Fuck. Goddamn mucus filled up over here. But I see how that's a fair point to an extent, because, you know, I can see how I can see the limitations on that comment. But essentially, after reading that comment from Mason, I then jumped in and said, "Hey guys, look, here's what I'm going to do." Because so many people wanted Kelce, so many people were sending Mason offers, Parker included. I'm pretty sure it was sent a couple, you know, joke trades. But
sent Riley Patterson, the kicker for Detroit, for Travis Kelce,
which is an unreal trade. I'm not sure why Mason didn't take that one, but yeah, I mean, it was a clearly fair trade. But, you know, multiple people wanted Kelce, and so I basically said, "Hey guys, look, here's what I'm gonna do. Since so many people want Kelce, I don't see it being fair anyways, because I think whoever gets Kelce at this point, their trade is just going to be vetoed no matter what." And because in fantasy, which me and Parker kind of had a discussion before the podcast, you know, we kind of both said, like, when you're trading in fantasy, there's certain players you're not going to give up in a trade, whether that's just because you want to keep them for a personal reason or because, you know, you want to try to win the trade in a sense. And because of that reason, I just didn't see anybody agreeing with any trades that were going to be made for Kelsey. So I said, hey guys, look, let's all just send Mason our offers and let him decide which one he wants to accept. And then when that decision is made, that's the trade that we'll have, that we'll let go through. And so everyone who wanted Kelsey sent Mason an offer, and he got a couple pretty good offers. I myself told Mason, I'm not going to offer you more. I'm just going to keep those same 3 players that we mentioned before, Nico Collins, Laporta, and Olave. Those were the only players that I was willing to give up. I'm sure it was a fleece. I'm sitting here now. I'll say it. It was a fleece. Like I fleeced Mason. I'm sorry, Mason. But I'm sorry, but that's just something that happens in fantasy all the time. People get fleeced all the time. Real life NFL teams get fleeced all the time. But regardless, multiple people sent Mason the trades. Mason decided to still take my offer out of all the other offers that were offered to him. And that is how Kelsey and Amari Cooper are now on my team.
I want to go back to your point, Josh, really quick, that you're saying that every trade for Travis Kelsey was getting vetoed. I don't 100% agree with that. I think that the trades that were sent to Mason for Travis Kelsey were not good offers. I genuinely just don't think that the value that Mason was getting back for what he was given wasn't good enough. And for me, I didn't really put in a serious offer for Kelsey. I was kind of just on the outside looking in at everything. And I know Alex, who's another person to add into the story, he was another person kind of just looking in, not giving crazy offers for Kelsey. But just, I don't think he was ever giving a good enough trade to be like, you know what, that's a fair trade. Both sides, that's a fair trade. That's something that shouldn't be vetoed. I think everything that was sent was one team is getting potentially a top 5 fantasy player, and the other team is getting a couple okay pieces, good pieces that are good flex options, but not someone that can be your running back 1, essentially. I just think that nothing, as far as an actual good trade, there was nothing there. At the end of the day, I guess it's done. I still don't agree with it. Especially I am 4-2, but my team is currently in shambles. I don't know where I'm gonna go. I need something. I had Justin Jefferson, who went down. I was undefeated until that point, until he went down, and now I've lost the 2 weeks that he has been out. So for me, looking at the trade, even if I didn't have a shot because my team just isn't that good anymore without Jefferson, I don't like that for someone that has been playing fantasy football my whole life. I see that, and I'm like, well, we're playing for second, third place, really. Because Noah, who kind of just drafted well, you can't be mad at the guy for drafting well. He's done a very good job drafting. He's going to be up there. And then Josh, who has Travis Kelsey now. He just added Travis Kelsey to an already stacked roster. Now everybody's playing for third place.
Yeah, and I mean, I get Parker's points, I do, and I mean, like you said, it kind of is what it is. Mason didn't have to take my trade. I think we kind of said, you know, Mason. We both kind of agreed that Mason probably shouldn't even have traded Kelsey.
I think he jumped the gun. I think he definitely should have waited much longer to trade Kelsey because the offers would have gotten just better the longer he waited because people wanted him, obviously.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, Kelsey, he could have. I think if he waited a little bit longer, I think somebody probably would have jumped in with a better offer. But at the same time, though, people also weren't offering him what Kelsey's value is. Most people's offers were, like you said, just kind of flex players, maybe a wide receiver too. I know what you said earlier. Kelsey is, he is what he is. He's a top 6 fantasy player every year. He is drafted in the top 6 every year. You should probably be getting somebody that is drafted in the first round every year as back, or somebody that's drafted before him in return. I can agree. I can agree with that. It definitely makes sense. But just as far as what I've seen from my experience in fantasy, I have seen many trades where people will trade more players that aren't necessarily at the same draft value, but the sole fact that it's, more players, there's added value from that, from the return that they're getting, which is whoever it may be, because, it could be anybody. But in my situation, that's just the best example that I can say. For example, in my other league that I am in, there was a trade last year, at the beginning of last year. If I can remember it correctly, it was James Robinson, Dallas Goedert.
Completely forgot about James Robinson even existing.
I know.
What happened?
Yeah, I know. Injuries, to be honest. Yeah, he's just had a lot of injury problems, and no team has been willing enough to hold on to him until he's been healthy. Although he did work out with the Giants, I believe.
No, he signed with the Giants.
He signed with the Giants. Was that today?
Oh wait, 8 hours ago, the Packers signed him. I'm sorry.
Oh, he signed with the Packers today, and is he on the active roster, or is he on
he's on the practice squad?
Just the practice squad? Okay. Well, regardless, it's good to see him sign to a team, because he was definitely good 3 years ago.
Oh my God!
When he was a rookie, I drafted him in fantasy his rookie year, and he tore it up for me.
And he's only 25 years old.
Yeah, he's young, but again, the injury bug, it can hit anybody, and it's hit him hard. But back to what I was saying, though. The trade was Dallas Goedert, James Robinson, and Devontae Smith, I want to say, for Travis Kelce and maybe one other player. If you look at that trade now, you'd probably be like, you'd probably just be like, what? Like, why would you ever do that? But at the time of that trade going down, Dallas Goedert was a top 5 fantasy tight end. James Robinson was a top 5 fantasy running back. And Smitty was an up-and-coming receiver in fantasy. Winded up having a pretty decent fantasy season. Yeah. And then when you take that perspective of it and you put it in my situation with the players that I gave him, you've got Nico Collins, who's wide receiver 12, I want to say, in fantasy, who honestly is kind of just looking up in an upwards trajectory, at least in my opinion, because he just kind of looks like CJ Stroud's favorite target. And CJ Stroud is passing the ball so much in every game. Chris Olave, who is the number 1 receiver in New Orleans, who I can admit hasn't been crazy consistent this year in fantasy, but he has the boomer bust potential to put up 20 plus points if he really wants to. And then Sam Laporta, who is tight end 2 behind Kelce, which I know you kind of said this earlier, but the tight end gap in fantasy is so awkward and weird, because you don't have very many consistent fantasy tight ends. And when you look at the fantasy leaderboard, as far as the top 4, I believe it goes Kelce, Laporta, Hawkinson, and Andrews, I believe, which all 4 of those tight ends are they've all been fairly consistent enough. Obviously, Kelsey is always far and above more consistent than everybody else. But I guess this leads me to ask you a question, Parker. If I was giving him Hawkinson or Andrews, would that who are ranked lower than Laporta, would that have been better than me giving him Laporta for Kelsey? Had I had Hawk or Andrews and given him Hawk or Andrews?
So are you saying like if instead of giving up Laporta, Collins, and Olave, you would given up Hawkinson, Collins, and Olave?
Yeah.
Well, no. I obviously Laporta, and so far in this season, what are we 6 weeks in? You obviously tier 1, your S tier is Travis Kelce. I would honestly, how it's kind of shaped out this year, I would put Laporta in his own tier at tier 2 by himself, and then you would put players like Hawkinson and Andrews, Kittle if he wants to be in that tier 3 level. So I think if you were to give up one of those players, it would just have made the trade even worse. Well, not for you. It would have made the trade even better for you. I think it's a fair trade if Amari Cooper was not involved in that trade. If you were to give up those three players and then receive just Kelsey back, it's a much more fair trade because now you're adding Cooper, who I would say is fairly close to the same level as Nico Collins or Chris Olave, maybe a little bit less this year. But he's the number one receiver in Cleveland. He's still a starting running back, and has that. I'm sorry, I said running back, receiver. He's still got that wide receiver 1 potential. I just feel like overall, honestly, I just don't think the trade was a fair trade at all. If there was grades on this trade, Josh, you would have got a plus 100%. Mason, I'm sorry to say it, but you would have got a C-, maybe a D.
Yeah, the only reason I asked that question was just because I don't know the percentage of people that play fantasy this way or see players this way, but I know there's probably a couple people out there that would see the name Hawkinson and Mark Andrews and hold that above, fantasy like numbers. So I was just wondering if like name value means anything to you at all, because I know, at least for me personally, it doesn't, just because if we're talking fantasy, it doesn't matter who the player is if they're not doing good. So I was just wondering, because I know for some people, if they see a name they don't recognize, their immediate reaction is like, who? Like, no, of course I don't want that player. A good example is Jaylen Warren. In my other league, nobody wants him because nobody knows who the fuck he is, but yet he is fairly consistent with the amount of points he's putting up every week. And it's not a necessarily low amount of points. It's a reasonable like 10 to 12, which obviously it could be better if he was the starter, but yeah, that's all I was wondering, was just for that reason.
I think too. Now, if you're asking someone like me that I live, eat, breathe, sleep football, and that's just really all I do is just pay attention to football, I know who Sam Laporta is. I know what type of season he's had, and not even fantasy wise, just watching him, like just playing football, he's really good. You get somebody that doesn't really keep up, like they watch football, but I mean they might just turn on a random Bengals game on a Sunday.
Real quick, so I don't mean to interrupt you, but if you look at the top 10 receiving leaders in the like tight end leaderboard, 8 of them are from Iowa, Laporta being one of them.
Oh yeah, that's far and away. Iowa is tight end university, far and away. I know a lot of people want to say it's Notre Dame. Stop it. It's not Notre Dame. It is not Notre Dame. It is Iowa. It's been Iowa for some time now. But to the average fan, not the deep dive like who me and Josh are, I think that they would see someone like Hawkinson or Mark Andrews maybe even Darren Waller, and you actually go back to Mark Andrews. A lot of people like, especially in our league, they like Mark Andrews more because he's a teammate of Lamar Jackson. Lamar Jackson went to Louisville. That automatically increases his value for whatever reason. But if you don't really know football the way we know football, you might actually see that. You might see that, oh, well, you're giving up Mark Andrews, who's the second best. Some people might say he's the best tight end in football, when he's not. He's 5, 3, 4, something like that. He's not. There's better options than him. I think it kind of just depends on the person you are, if how much you really know. And there's nothing wrong with it, but that's just how I kind of see it.
Yeah, I mean, if you have a personal like connection to a player, there's no like that doesn't diminish your thoughts about football, but it definitely makes it questionable to other people, especially if you were to make a trade for said player or give up said or receive said player, and which then leads you to getting fleeced. It would probably make a lot of people question your decision making. But as far as fantasy goes, do you have anything else you would like to talk about or mention? Maybe just about like any players you've noticed that are doing oddly good in fantasy this year, or have you noticed anything, maybe anything else in our league other than,
Yeah. I would, a player that, which it makes sense. I don't know why it kind of just shocked me this year, but he is so good. He's just so incredibly good, is Keenan Allen. And every year he puts up very similar numbers, but for whatever reason, I feel like this year he's gone over and beyond. Now, if that might be because Mike Williams hasn't been playing, but you look at his fantasy, I guess, game log from the past like 3-4 years, he's always been really good. But this year, he has just turned into a great receiver. He's someone to watch. A guy that I was talking to you, Chad, about that I really want on my team. I'm currently trying to figure out a way to get him on my team. Is Adam Thielen. He kind of came from almost being out of the league essentially. His time in Minnesota was kind of overdue with Jettas coming in. Then he goes to Carolina, and he has been just maybe a top 5 receiver in football this year.
I mean, yeah, as a Vikings fan, it's nice to see because Adam Thielen was so productive and such a good receiver in Minnesota. But like you said, when Jettas came in, his production just kind of tanked, and it made me question as a Vikings fan, and he's old too, he's not excuse me. He's not a young player by any means. I mean, I'm pretty sure he's young 30s, if that. Mm-hmm. But he's seemingly turning over a new leaf over in Carolina. I mean, he's Bryce Young's wide receiver 1 far and away. I mean, it's just so obvious. His connection with Bryce Young is incredible. And, I mean, he's not having any injury problems, knock on wood, as far as I know. But, yeah, he's looked incredible this year in fantasy. Obviously, those first couple weeks were a little rough, but ever since then,
the first week he put up 3 points, but then since then, since week 1 he hasn't dropped less than 15 points.
Yeah, I mean that's some crazy production for a player that I think caught a lot of people off guard, and I'm sure he was on the waiver wire for a lot of leagues. So for whoever was able to get him in their league, I mean, hats off to you, because I'm sure there's a lot of jealous people now, and I'm sure there's a lot of people that would like to trade for him now. You being one.
Yeah, I'm pursuing heavily. I just haven't really done anything productive, but I just keep telling myself I want him. That's about as far as it's gone. But yeah, you kind of just look at Carolina's roster, especially after last year. DJ Moore is the clear number 1 receiver in Carolina. He goes on to Chicago, And you kind of like, okay, you got this rookie quarterback and Bryce Young. Who is going to be that guy? Who's going to be the guy to help him out in that situation? And really, the stars align perfectly. You have a rookie quarterback that you can tell is fairly timid, definitely isn't really what people thought he was going to be so far this year. And then you have a veteran, very technical, fundamental receiver in Adam Thielen. I mean, it just kind of meshes just perfectly. Very similar to how Tom Brady was with Julian Edelman. Somebody that's very, very just kind of, he does his job. He runs his routes correctly. He catches the ball. He doesn't try to do anything too fancy. And it's working. And obviously we see that in Carolina, even if the wins aren't putting up. But in the fantasy world, it is working very well.
Yeah, and another player that I've noticed kind of coming onto the scene this year, he is a rookie, and he is unfortunately on IR right now. But Devon Achane, I mean, I think a lot of people, especially if you watch ball and you just kind of know like who players are, coming into this season, he had a lot of hype around him as, you know, a potential like one of the best rookies so far this season. And I mean, before the injury, he's looked every damn bit of that. I mean, 51 points, and then to not regress from that and to keep consistent and score more than 20 points after that 51-point performance. I mean, just, and on top of that, he's seemingly taking that starting spot from Mostert. I mean, before the injury, of course. Obviously, Mostert is the clear starter now, who, by the way, has also looked insanely good this season, and who also is another older guy who has just looked just had a resurgence and looked super youthful this year. But yeah, Devon Achane has been really impressive, and he's definitely been impressing me a lot. A guy that I tried to get off of waivers, but unfortunately I just was not quick enough in order to get him. Mm-hmm. But I mean, hats off to anybody who has him on their team, because he is just outstanding.
Yeah, and then also, just to add in there, I know he hasn't played it yet. I played it all this season because he's been hurt, but the Dolphins also have another running back in their room as well, Jeff Wilson, who at the beginning of the season, before he went down with an injury, I think there was a decent amount of people saying that Jeff Wilson was going to be the starter. So you run this two-man kind of weave almost with Jeff Wilson and Raheem Mostert. Achane was kind of like the wingman, you know. He was that side piece. No one really know exactly where he was gonna go. It might take him a few years to get his feet wet until he can really develop into the running back that he was in college. Come week 3, he's putting up 50 points, and if I'm not mistaken, let me look it up really quick. That was really, he went from 0 points. Now, he may have not even played week 1 to 1.9 points in week 2 to 51 in week 3. I don't think we've ever seen that before, ever in the history of fantasy. Before we even played fantasy, Josh, I don't think we've ever seen a player do something like that.
Yeah, I mean, especially that 50-point mark. I mean, that's so rare to see. I mean, I think we've seen it only a couple times in the past couple years. I think Alvin Kamara did it a couple years ago in that Christmas game.
That was fun.
And then Joe Mixon last year, which was also a pretty fun game to watch, especially with me having Joe Mixon on one of my fantasy teams last year. I mean, that game was, I don't quite remember if he broke the 50-point mark, but I think he was pretty damn close. But yeah, it's definitely not a point mark that you see very often. And I mean, I gotta mention it though too. In that same game that Achane dropped 51, Mostert dropped, what was it, 45? I mean, to have both of your running backs
almost score
100 points combined, I mean, that's insane. Now, I know they kind of embarrassed the Broncos, and they kind of, you know, went a little overboard maybe with how many points they were stacking on. But, I mean, A-Chain, a big part of his points came in the fourth quarter when he got put in and they sat Mostert for the game. I mean, just, again, it goes back to earlier in the episode when we were talking about that Dolphins defense. I mean, in that same game, Tyreek Hill dropped 28, maybe 30, I think. I mean, it's just, that team is just, they're so good, and I just don't understand it.
Yeah. Another kind of little discussion we can have is the running back situation in Indianapolis, right? So Taylor obviously had his contract issues and then got put on the PUP list. So Zach Moss, coming from Buffalo, he got traded from Buffalo last year. He kind of got the starting keys while Taylor was out, and really did his job. He did his job 100%. He was, I think, fantasy-wise, he was top 10 running back. Then Taylor comes back. A lot of people either sat Zach Moss or they completely dropped him for Jonathan Taylor. And then finally Taylor does come back. What happens? Zach Moss is still it seems like still the starting running back. Now, I think that's going to change over the next few weeks. I think that Jonathan Taylor is going to continuously get his feet wet in this season. It's been a while since he's played football. But Zach Moss still really has the keys for that running game. And I'm just curious to see, like, if you are a fantasy owner of Zach Moss, is that somebody that are you consistently playing him every week?
Me personally, I think you can probably start him for the next couple weeks if you really have to, but I think in the long run, it's not somebody you're starting. I think Jonathan Taylor is probably going to take over the reins again, and I mean, even when you look at that game that JT had, his first game back, I mean, I'm pretty sure JT dropped a respectable 13. I know Zach Moss kind of overshadowed him by dropping, I think it was 31. But, I mean, on limited touches, dropping 13, that's pretty good in my opinion. Yeah. Especially for your first game back in probably a year at this point, I would say. I mean, I know he played last year, but he just sat out for so long with no football. I mean, but yeah, I think Zach Moss is kind of running on limited time right now. I do believe that won't be a running back by committee system come a couple weeks. But we'll see. I could eat those words, and I could be very wrong because, I mean, like you said, Zach Moss has looked very impressive.
Yeah, and then going back to our league, Noah, who I was talking about earlier, having such a stacked team, and I said he just drafted really well. A part of his drafting strategy was he took both Alvin Kamara and Jonathan Taylor. And if you all remember, at the beginning of the season, it was so unclear if when Kamara comes back from his suspension, how good is he going to be? Especially with having someone like Jamal Williams, who had the most rushing touchdowns in football last year. I don't know if you knew that or not. And then Jonathan Taylor, you didn't even know if he was going to play at all. And so he took a stab on both of them, and now that both of them are starting to get healthy, Kamara has been lights out since he's came back. And now Taylor, if he continuously gets better, I mean, there's no it shows you exactly why Noah's team is so good. And just if you were to take a stab on those players, they are paying off big time.
Yeah, I mean, Noah definitely drafted well. The risks he took in the draft definitely paid off. But I am excited to see how the fantasy season pans out. I mean, obviously, I hope I win the league, but I hope that some fun can be brought back into the league.
I'm winning it.
I'm
gonna take that. I'm taking the Miami Heat route here. All these other people are trying to build these super teams. I am gonna go into the playoffs. My best player might just be Aaron Jones, but I'm going to go into those playoffs. I'm going to make this crazy run, and I'm not just going to stop where the Miami Heat stopped. I'm going to finish their job, and I'm going to bring home that title for the city of Miami.
I mean, a boy can dream, right?
It's not a dream.
A boy can dream.
It's not a dream.
But that is going to do it from us here at the Take His Whistle podcast. A special episode with me and Parker being together in person for this one. Parker, do you have any final thoughts or words?
Don't get used to this crisp sounding voice of mine. I will be more than likely reverting back to the more grainier phone call, as some people have said. It sounds like I'm on a phone call with Josh. That's not the case, but it's gonna probably sound like that. Again, just give me a few more weeks. I'm still working on it. Shit ain't cheap. That's all I'm trying to say. That's all I got.
It is not cheap for sure, and I think Parker now knows that a little bit more after I told him how much all of my shit costed, because it definitely it hurt my pockets for sure. But thank you guys for listening to the second NFL episode. Of course, as always, we're gonna have our college episode for you guys on Thursday. I mean, another stacked episode. Just so much to talk about.
Lots to talk about.
Yeah, and it's going to be another fun one. But thank you guys for listening, as always, and we will see you guys on Thursday.
See ya.